Hey guys, so welcome back to my list of top 10 favorite Shakespeare plays. This is going to be number 2, which is of course Henry V. Now, if you've been following the rest of this list, then it becomes very obvious that this whole history cycle is one of my favorite plot lines in Shakespeare. The two prequels to this, Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, have both made this top 10 list in one form or another, so yeah. The reason that this one is my favorite though is because it focuses in completely and directly on my favorite character of this, which is Henry V, who is formerly Prince Hal from the previous two plays. If you know the story of the previous two plays, you know that those two plays, in reference to this character, are largely about him coming into his own as Henry V. He went from being a very irresponsible, seemingly bad potential ruler to being the king of England, Ireland, Scotland, you know, basically the entire kingdom of Great Britain at the time. Now, when this play starts, he's been king for a little while now. Not super long, it's still fairly early on in his reign, but it's long enough that people are starting to talk. There's a whole conversation at the beginning between a couple people who are just in shock about how he's behaving as a king and how he's so different from what any of them anticipated. And it's really, really interesting to read. However, the main plot of this play is taken up with Henry going and fighting a war in France. You see him lead his army across to France, fight the Battle of Agincourt, fight a couple of other battles as well. It's basically about him establishing himself as a warrior king and kind of taking his position as king of England fully, or Britain. Sorry, England is only part of Britain. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting about this play is kind of how it deals with Hal's character arc. Sorry, Henry, he's Hal in the previous plays. Now, when you look at stories of this type that are done today, they usually end where Henry IV Part 2 ends, with the main character reaching the end of their character arc, so to speak. But Henry V, it kind of shows how the end of a character arc is not the end. Because just because he has become king and established the goal that he set at the beginning of Henry IV Part 1 for himself does not mean that he is done growing as a person. In this play, we see him dealing with the fallout of his decisions in Henry IV Part 2. So we see him confronting former friendships and relationships that he had as a prince, but now as a king. Because, again, a lot of his friends from before he became king were criminals, and he now as king can't condone their actions. So you see him approaching these things and dealing with them. You also see how he deals with being in charge of an army and how he deals with just being on the battlefield. Hal shows a very, very cutthroat side in this play, and it's kind of frightening at times, actually. There's two moments in this play where he legitimately scares me. One in particular, so this speech is spoken after the Battle of Harfleur. His forces have taken over a French town. And this is basically his speech to the mayor saying, "Are you going to surrender? Because if you don't, this is what's going to happen." And it's a very graphic speech. That's the scene where I just kind of go, oh, right, I forgot you're not a nice person all the time. Because the thing about Harry is he can be very, very charming. I think it depends on the actor, but he can be very, very charming, so you sometimes forget that he definitely has a dark side. This is probably the most extreme case of it. You see tiny hints of it earlier on in the Henriade and in this series of plays. I talked about it a little bit in some of the earlier videos, but this is the play where you really see him struggling to get this dark side reined in, because that speech happens, but then you also see the opposite, where he shows mercy, and he can be very, very ruthless in how he deals with people, but he can also be very kind. One thing that is a little bit interesting in this play, there are quite a few of his motivations that are murky in the text. The actual reason behind starting this war is unclear. He claims to have a rightful claim to the French throne, and he can go back through his family tree to track it, but it's like this super complicated, like mother's cousin's nephew's former roommate situation, where it's like, I'm not even sure if it matters at this point, even if it's legal. And so it's kind of like, you're just digging for an excuse at this point, Harry, aren't you? And that's very, very possible. It is possible that he thinks he is the rightful king, but it's also kind of like, your claim is so tenuous, is it really worth it? So another more likely reason here, well, there's two. One is just flat out greed, which is distinctly possible. I like to think that it's more of the other reason, which is still kind of not sure how I feel about it, but the other reason that I think is the most likely one, especially since it does get brought up in Henry IV Part 2 as advice from his father, is the actual kingdom of Great Britain is being torn apart. There's internal conflict and strife. So basically find an external foe for everyone to unite against. And it happens to be the French. So that's another possible reason why this war is going on. So his actual motivations are kind of like, and to take a look at this. But the thing is that real people don't have straight black and white motivations. So they're hopefully the situation isn't as murky as this most of the time, but it's something that I do appreciate, that Shakespeare doesn't make Harry a black and white hero. Another layer to this kind of motivation is that he uses the excuse of the Dauphin insulting him, which, yeah, he does. The Dauphin actually insults him quite badly. He takes Harry's Prince Holidays and throws them in his face, and he does it with an insult that is kind of supposed to be, it looks like it's supposed to be an undercurrent, and where it's kind of like you think the Dauphin isn't necessarily even expecting Hal to understand what he's saying. And Hal, sorry, I keep switching between his different nicknames, he chooses to take this insult and use it as the excuse to attack France. So, yeah, it's like lots of different things going on here with Hal's motivation. Another thing that you see a lot of in this play is him arguing what the nature of authority and kind of how he's similar and different from his subjects. There's one scene where he disguises himself as a regular soldier and then goes and walks in amongst his men and talks to them. And the conversations he has are very interesting. There's a couple different conversations that happen here, but the one that for me stands out the most is the one where he talks to a couple of soldiers and they argue back and forth. One of them is not pleased with the king, and it ends with the king and this soldier agreeing to meet after the battle and fight. This poor man doesn't know that he's just challenged the actual king to a fight. That is literal treason. He could be executed for this. And it actually has a really nice resolution. I like how that plot line is resolved. But, oh, this poor man. So, yeah, and you can tell that Hal is struggling with his new position. I think that he is suited to the position of king, but I think he's lonely. One plot line that I'm not as familiar with as I am the rest of his play is the treason plot line. There's a couple of his friends that try to betray him early on in the play. These are his noble friends, I believe. And that kind of really sets off how Hal is very isolated in this play. You see how he sometimes interacts with his former friends and how he interacts with these foot soldiers and how he has a hard time connecting with people in this play, I feel. Because he's very, very charismatic and he can really get to them, but none of them can really get to him. Because he has to be above all this stuff. He has to be this figurehead and he has to be strong for everyone else. And you can really see that in this play. And it kind of, you can see it playing out in various ways throughout the plot. One of my favorites, though, is in the final section of this play, when he has a conversation with Princess Catherine of France. She's one of like 2 female characters in this play. No, 3. Mistress Quickly's also in this play. And at this point, the conversation is basically, could you love me? Because they are, for all intents and purposes at this point, engaged. They've never met, though, before this scene. And it's really half hilarious, half sad, half part just entertaining, watching how Hal has no idea how to deal with talking to a woman he can actually marry. And complicating the situation even further is the fact that Catherine barely speaks English and Hal barely speaks French. So they kind of stumble through this awkward conversation. Her maid is there acting as a translator because her maid used to live in England, so her English isn't perfect, but it's pretty close. I actually think that Alice, the maid, or Elise, I guess, I'm sorry, my French accent is horrible, may have previously been the maid to Isabella, Catherine's older sister, because Isabella was the wife of Richard II, who was King of England a couple kings previously. So my guess is that's why Alice was in France, but it very well could be a completely different reason. I don't actually know. That's just kind of how I tend to look at it. Anyway, after that, off from that tangent. So this whole scene, Alice is kind of acting as translator as these two are awkwardly trying to talk to each other. And it's very bizarre watching Hal do this because he's normally very, very eloquent. But in this scene, he stumbles and he has no clue what to say. I mean, it's the Shakespeare version of ineloquent, which basically is code for still eloquent, but claiming to be ineloquent, so whatever. But it's markedly different from how he talks normally. like, this specific kind of pressure is something he's never dealt with before. He's never talked to a woman he actually was in a position to marry. So the minute he's talking to this woman who he is practically engaged to at this point, but he doesn't actually want to just marry her, it's clear that he wants to actually have a good relationship with her, or to at least try. He has no idea what to say. So this whole scene, it's actually really cute and awkward. It can be, okay, the cuteness levels dependent on the actors and how they choose to play the scene out. But it's, yeah, I personally like the scene. Oh, and also, going back to Catherine for a minute, she and Alice actually have a scene earlier on in the play that it's just the two of them for pretty much the entire scene, and spoken almost entirely in French. And the scene is Alice teaching Catherine how to speak English. Catherine speaks no English at all when that scene starts, or at least as far as we're aware, she speaks none. So for the majority of that scene, they're just speaking in French. But Alice is, you know, training her because Catherine, it's never said why Catherine suddenly wants to do this, but it can be inferred that this young lady knows there's a high likelihood she's going to be engaged to the King of England soon because her father's in a war with the man, and her marrying him could be a way to resolve the situation. So that's a possible reason why she's learning English. I personally think that's the most likely reason. So yeah, but I just find that scene really interesting because, one, Catherine is very much taking the initiative here, and two, this scene is spoken entirely in French, like I said before, which makes it a very interesting scene to perform for an English-speaking audience. And also, because of the scene between Catherine and Alice, the play technically passes the Bechdel test because it has a scene where two female characters are having a conversation with each other about something other than men. The conversation being learning how to speak English. So yeah, I find that kind of interesting. So yeah, really good play. It has an amazing character study of how. It's not as focused as something like Hamlet, but that's only because it's being channeled through other means than Hamlet is, I would say. There's less talking about it and more just straight up doing things, although there is still a lot of talk. It has some definite dark moments, I would say, in this play, but it's very well written, it's really interesting, and it's a good closeout to the Henriade, with the exception of the very, very end, because historically speaking, Henry V had a rather anticlimactic end. So yeah, but I would still recommend this play. I still think it's worth it. My favorite version is The Hollow Crown, starring Tom Hiddleston as Henry V. It is absolutely amazing, so well done. And then of course it also has the two previous plays, also starring Tom Hiddleston in the title role. So if you want to see the full character arc of Prince Hal with a single actor, there's this version. I know there are other versions, but this is the one that I really love. So yeah, really, really well done. Thanks for watching, you guys. I'm always happy to talk to you guys about anything, especially regarding Shakespeare, so feel free to comment down below, and I will talk to you all later. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.